Alrighty. So we're going to cover some slides real quickly, and then we'll get going through the lecture. Talk about user authentication today, what that looks like, kind of at a high level, what it means, and also looking at doing it ourselves. So for the homework, let's get a few things. Can someone share what they liked about the homework? What do they enjoy about doing the exercise? What did you enjoy? What was nice about the homework? Anyone?
It's nice to make a restaurant website with the e-commerce and yeah, I'm better with working with model and relationship between them.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, we're getting a feel of how things are related to one another.
But I still have a lot of questions.
Okay, we'll cover some of those today. What uh, what are some questions that you have? So you mentioned some of the model relationships.
Yes, example, when I working with the order, I want to add the customer relationship.
Gotcha.
And in the when you put the delivery information, it's actually customer information.
Yeah.
But I need to call a order controller.
Okay.
I don't know how to create
Okay.
a new customer relate to this order.
Absolutely. Okay. So some model relationships. What are the things else that people are confused about? Nothing. So everyone understands everything completely. All right, we'll get going. We'll talk about some of the things. And if you have more questions that it comes up, please go ahead and ask. Let's go ahead and present. Awesome. Everyone, welcome to week 2. You made it. Woohoo. Good job turning in the homework. And good job showing up to class on time. Thank you, everyone. Just class rules again, just a quick repeat. Must come to every class. Lori took your attendance today, so if Lori did not get your name down, make sure you see him. You must be in class on time, so thanks everyone for showing up on time. You must submit homework by Sunday at midnight. Right, some people had questions this morning or last night, and so if you found yourself kind of pushing the deadline or maybe submitting it late, that means you should probably start earlier. Right, give yourself more time to do it. Don't wait until last moment. Things last thing minute, things always come up. It's easy to say it works, and then you push to Heroku and it doesn't. So give yourself time for all those sort of last minute things. Don't wait until 11:55 to do git push Heroku. You must be honest. I sent out a survey last time. Only a few people responded. So fill it out because it helps us, figure out what questions are out there, and kind of helps you kind of remember and reflect on what you learned. It seemed like from those who responded that you guys liked using Faker as a gem, which is really cool. Most of you liked pair programming, which is great to hear. So we'll have another lab on Wednesday, a chance to pair program again and work on some new things. But fill out the survey. It really just helps us kind of be honest about what we've learned and where we're going. And just some tips again. We should start the homework early. Don't wait to the last second. Try a breath first approach. So if you get really stuck on something, don't let that lose motivation. Don't stop and give up. Do something else and then maybe come back to it and work on it. But don't get stuck on one thing and prevent you from doing other things. Feel free to work together. Thank you for those in the Slack group for helping each other out. It's fantastic. It's what we want to see. Ask questions in the Slack group. Everyone's there to help you. Yourselves, the TAs, and myself. So definitely, good job making use of the Slack group. And thank you for those who helped other people out as well. It's fantastic. And feel free to share your discoveries. I think Chi did last week. He had an issue. He had an issue, solved it, posted it in Slack. Fantastic job. It really helps everyone to kind of figure out what went wrong and what we can improve upon. All right, so we had some fantastic homework submissions. Most of you guys did a pretty good job with this, but I wanted to highlight just a few of them that were top-notch, who went above and beyond. So the first one was Nguyen Hong Yang. I don't know if that's yours. Nice job. Okay, let's see if we can get this magic to work. Great. So you see here, a lot of cool functionality. Can you guys see that? We have a shopping cart up here, like an order checkout. Good job of using Faker for some data. You can even leave a review, with your new username and a score and how good it was. We have a lot of different options here, as well as some prices. We can filter by a lot of different things. We got a cuisine filter, so if we search for Germany, great. We see all the items that come from Germany. That's pretty neat. Let's say we want to order this one. We say add it to orders. And it looks like now we have some orders. You can change the quantity here. Nice little UI an update. I wonder if we type in the secret code, and if we check out, okay, great. We have some validations asking us about username, phone, address. Great, and a really cool. Good job styling it as well. Definitely some nice style on here, and a lot of functionality. So good job. Let's give him a round of applause. All right. Next one, Wung Tru Pham. Who was this? Nice. Awesome job with King Restaurants. Let's open it up here. And good job, guys. Not just completing the minimum, but having some fun with it, kind of going beyond what is required, and really kind of giving a good effort to put in a lot of work on these. Great. So here we have some pretty nice UI, a lot of cool images, and some nice cards. A lot of different items on the menu. That's fantastic. With sort. So you can sort by breakfast. Let's say we want to just get drinks. Cool. We have different types of cuisine here, and we can sort it by different quantities. That's fantastic. Search bar, again, also an order cart. So not just being able to order one item, but being able to order multiple items, which is pretty fantastic. It looks like if we just click on this guy, we get some text. We can rate it. We can add it to the order. Sweet. So let's go check out the order. And here we go. We got our order. We can, and it's even has some validation, which is cool. And there we go. Thanks for the order. Order is at, and gives us our date timestamp up there. Fantastic. So again, good job. Nice. Last one I want to highlight. Dawn Nguyen. Nice job. Delicious. We'll spin these up. Sometimes Heroku puts the dinos to sleep because it's the free account. So that was pretty quick. Nice. We have a really nice UI here. You can add to cart. You can view it. A lot of different images. So it's pretty neat. You can sort by, again, type of cuisine. Nice with the vegan. You can have alphabetical, which you can sort by. You can kind of filter out by different types. That's great. And you notice here it uses the params. Section ID, like we kind of talked about last time. A slick contact us page. It'll take you right to the Independence Palace. Fancy cuisine. If we want to add something to the cart, we'll add some alfalfa. Great. Nice, a message with success. Let's check it out there. Cool. Information put out from us. Great. Coupon. Let's see if we can try our Coder School discount. So the price here is $213,000. Let's go ahead and create it, and we got a discount. Very nice. And order information, and just some nice UI all around. Putting a lot of effort on the styling, on the checkout. So nice job. Alrighty, so I wanted to kind of go over a few different things and kind of refresh what we talked about last week. And this is a good chance to also ask questions and kind of go over that. So I checked out a repository, and this one is from Thien Phuc. Just kind of as an example, just to talk about things that we've learned. So I'm going to open it up. Cool. So let's check out our food item, right? We have belongs to section, great. Here we have in the model, we have a search function, which is good. Remember we talked about last time that the Rails way is to put all of the business logic in the model, right? So the controllers really want them to be as thin as possible, and you want to put a lot of your business logic and functionality into the model. And so let's check out the food item controller. And here, right, we have some actions, right? We have our index, which basically shows us everything. Right, if you want to create a food item, it kind of checks the params and goes ahead and saves it. You can update it and destroy, which is good. And let's check out, home controller. Oops. Let's see what app controllers. Here we have orders controller, and we have static pages controller. And so here, right, we kind of have some params, which is sorting, which is good. If we want, we can even move this all into the food item, right? So we could kind of say something like, at food items, right, equals food item dot, query. We can say, params, and we can pass the params through and go from there. Or again, we kind of talked about last time having private methods, so we could have, some like menu params, right? And we can say params dot permit, right? Which basically we can whitelist which params to go through. So you can do that and then pass it through. So then if we were to do something like this, where we kind of, instead of putting all this logic here, we could then put something like this into the food item, right? So then if we open up the model, we can kind of define our own function, self.query, and we could take in some params, right? And so again, we're using here self because self is a class method and not an instance method, right? So if it was an instance method, we'd have to get like a food item, and we could call query on it, right? But that doesn't make as much sense in this case since we're trying to get food items. So we're going to reference the class here, not an instance, right? And so that's why we have the self keyword here. We'll pass through params, right? And this way, all right, if this is present, go ahead and get the section, get the food items, and then maybe here, we return food items instead of just, right? So food items for now equals nil, right? We set them, and we can return them, right? Something like that. So this way is kind of just moving the logic out of the controller and into the model. And at the end here, right, we return food items. And in Ruby, you can write return food items. That's great. But it also just by default returns the last line. So something like that would be enough, right? Food items. Maybe one more there, right? Simple. And then in the controller, right, all we had here is add food items. And that's because the function we've just defined goes ahead and returns food items. And we set that here, and that's great, right? And so this is kind of keeping with the Rails way of keeping the controllers light. Really, the controllers are meant for parameter parsing, redirecting, showing some UI components. So, showing some Flash messages, showing some HTML, right? All that is good in the controller. But we really want to start thinking about what is the Rails way. And the Rails way is, rely on your models. Let your models kind of be the single point for a lot of these actions. And so we can do something like this as well. So here we have an orders controller, which is great. And the order belongs to food item. So this is a nested resource, right? So that means the order is belongs to food item. And that means the food item also then has many orders, right? You don't have to define that. Nothing in Rails will throw an error if you do. But if you wanted to query food item dot orders, then you would need to have this line here, right? So this line kind of is a helper. It lets you access the orders directly from the food item. Without that, you would have to write your own query or something. And so this is kind of just a nice helper method that Rails provides, right? So we have our order. It belongs to food item, which is great. And so if we wanted to actually see the order, right, we could check out our routes. And here, right, it's a nested resource, which is great, which means the URL would look something like, right, it would look like food items. Then you'd have your ID, of your food item. Then you'd have your order, order, right? And then because resources is here, right? Resources gives us the standard RESTful API routes. So that was like new and create and show. And so you could, we'd have a bunch of routes like order, order ID for updating and for deleting. And so it's because we've defined the resources in a nested way, right? So the orders then, because they're nested under food items, right? We'd have to access them this way via their food item. We wouldn't just be able to, say get that because, right, that wouldn't exist given how we've defined our routes. So something to keep track of is, right, the routes here, which is, right, so orders here belongs to food items. So this is the right way to do it. Last time we also talked about section ID, right, and passing in a section ID is a parameter. And that's definitely one approach. Another approach is to declare them as nested resources. So you could even say sections, right, and resources is plural. And then underneath it, you could say resources food items. And rather than having a route that looked like this last time, we did sections, and then we kind of had a parameter, right? We had a parameter, we said, I think it was index, and then we had a parameter that looked like section ID equals some number, right? That's passing it as a parameter, which you could do. We also could make it a part of the route, and so then we could say, section, and then pass in the ID that way. And that just kind of, rather than having this parameter here, we're saying, all right, we expect the ID now to be part of the route. Again, different ways of doing things. It's not like one way is better than the other. I think the Rails way is to do it more like this, to kind of include them as resources. But there's nothing saying that this is a bad approach. This can start to get lengthy, though, if you have and, order item equals 15, right, and customer ID equals, right, getting at the sense that this could start to get a little long. But again, there's nothing saying that, this wouldn't get just as long. So it's just a matter of preferences, but this is a little bit more of the Rails way. Cool, so that was kind of the, we're going to close this out. Cool. So I also want to talk a little bit about object relations, because that seems to be a question. So I have just a basic app here, and it's kind of two classes. There's an author class, which has many books, and then there's a book class, which belongs to author, right? Just kind of a basic thing. And the schema, very basic, right? We have author with the name on it. Then we also have some books. So we have the name of the book, the type of the book, and just an author ID. Okay, so just a very basic model, but let's kind of use this as a way to talk about relations, right? So we say an author has many books. That's great. So let's open up a Rails console and kind of play around with things. So right now, let's just see what we have. I didn't do Rails DB create. We'll go ahead and create our database. Okay, it already exists. Undefined relation authors does not exist. Cool. All right, didn't run migrate. So we have 0 authors, and we'll just say, all right, we have 0 books. Oops. And again, that's the kind of the plural side. So models are always singular. So let's say I wanted to create an author, right? I could run author.new. And what does that return to me? Right? It returns to me an author object. But .new doesn't save it in the database, right? So if I were to still ask the database how many authors are in the database, there's still 0. What author.new does is it returns to me an instance of an author model, right? But it's not saved yet, and I'm free to modify it. So I can save it to the variable a, right? And if you notice right now, all the fields are nil. And one way of seeing if the model is saved is you can just look at it, the ID field. If the ID is nil, that means it's not saved. You also can ask if it's a valid model. So if there's any validations on it, that will ask you whether or not it's valid. In this case, we have no validations, so we'll say, all right, it's true. We can ask if it's persisted, right? That is it stored in the database, which is kind of a nice helper. And it says false, which means it's not stored in the database. And so that was author.new, right? Now, what's the difference between .new and .create? Well, .create will actually go ahead and save it in the database for us, right? So if we said author.create as is, it would save for us in the database a model with all nil fields. Let's go ahead and kind of create an author. So we're going to say Mark Twain. He's an American author. I don't know, he has some interesting stories worth checking out. But anyway, now that we have created this author, right, now we can say, all right, how many authors are there in the database? And we have one. Fantastic. And if we look at our author, now we have an ID, we have a name, we have created at and updated at timestamps. So this is great. If we look back at our model here, right, we said has many books. And what the beauty of that is we can now say, all right, the author, give me his books. And you notice here it actually prints out the SQL. It basically is asking for the books where the books.author_ID, this part, right, equals 1. And so it's turning a.books into a SQL statement, but it knows to look only at the books belonging to our author. So here we have a.books, and it's a proxy, but there's nothing in it. It's empty. So let's say we want to create a book now for an author. And there's a few ways we can do this, right? Because of this nested relationship, we can actually say a.books.build. And .build is similar to .new. They're very similar in that it'll return to you an instance of a book, but it doesn't actually create it for us, right? So if we wanted to, let's say equals, right? Now we have an instance of a book object. You'll notice here that it already filled out the author ID for us. And how did it know that? Well, because we passed in the author object, right? We said on the author, on its books, go ahead and build something. Still, right, since we called build, it didn't actually create it in the database. So we still have nothing in the database. But it gave us at least an object we can play with. And again, is it persisted? No. Right, it has very little information, but at least it has the author ID. So we're going to maybe go ahead and update some of the information. So we're going to say, all right, we're going to call this Tom Sawyer. And we're going to say the book type, I'm just going to say fiction. Right, so now we have some information. Great. We have a name, book type. Let's go ahead and save this. And it goes ahead and actually inserts it in the database. And we can always verify that. We're saying, great, we have something in the database. And it has an ID on it, so we also know that we can reference it from the database. That's great. So now if we go back and we have our A object, right? A is our author. We can say a.books, and it'll actually go ahead and this time find the first book for us, right? Because again, it's looking for the books where the author ID is 1, and we just created one. So that's nice. Let's say we want to create another book, right? The first time around, we did a.books.build, right, which returned an object to us, but it didn't save it. We could also call a.books.create, right? And what's the difference? We'll create, as we said, we'll create it and save it for you, whereas build just creates it. So that's another convenience method if you want to go ahead and create it, right? And we mentioned last time how you can always add a bang to it, and that gives you a hard failure. So rather than just return true or false, the bang actually says if it doesn't work, throw an error, right? Throw an exception so we actually can catch it. But let's say we didn't have access to A for some reason. We wanted to create our book on our own, right? So we could build our own book. Actually, we could say book.new, right? If we did that, it wouldn't know though, right? The author ID field is nil, right? It doesn't quite know yet how to relate itself to the book. So we can actually say book.new, and we can pass in an author ID, right? In this case, we have the author ID because A is our author object. We can say create it that way. Rails is also smart enough. Well, because it's a reference, you can even just say author is A. And if we do that, it'll create for us a book object with the author ID field filled out to 1. Okay, so there's just many ways that you can create something. Now, let's say you wanted to, create something and save it all in one request with a lot of things. So let's go ahead and do that. So book.create, and we're going to say author is A. We're going to give it a name. Right? And let's get a book type as well, just to keep it consistent. Right? So now we're going to create our object, and we've manually passed in here the author as the relation. We'll go ahead and save it. Great. And because we called create, that saves it in the database. Now we have an ID, right? We have updated that and created that timestamps, right? We have 2 rows in the database. And now if we were to ask for a.books, what should we get back? Build a new. That's so new is something you'd call on the class. So you'd call book.new, right, with a capital B. If you call book.build, it won't recognize it, right? So if you have the class, you refer to the class, you would call .new. Oh, sorry, book.new, right? Build is something you'd call by referencing it this way. So here, if you call .new, this wouldn't work, right? This also works. So you can call .build this way, but you cannot call it like that. That one will work. Good question. Right, so we have here our books. Great. You know, we can even, if we want to, start to query on them. So we could just say, you know, where name is Huck Finn, right? And it'll go ahead and do a query on those books relating to the author. So you notice here in the SQL, it still says, right, books.author_ID, and then it supplies in 1 as the author ID. Right, so if you can still, using this method, still do your normal active record queries. You could also, if you want to, query them this way, right? You say author ID is a.id name, right? You can also do it that way. One more thing I want to touch upon is how to query things. So, right, we can say, you know, .where. You also do .find. Find expects an ID, but if you pass in a bad ID, it'll throw an exception, right? It throws an active record not found exception. Sometimes we want that, but sometimes we don't want to throw an error if we can't find it. We want to just, you know, catch it and maybe show a message. So you actually can do find by, and you can pass in an ID this way. And find by will just ask for the first thing. So you notice here it says limit, right? And it puts in 1. So it's just find me the first one where the ID is 1. And we have here a model to play around with. You also can, because this is Rails, you can query directly. So you can say find by ID. And essentially you can replace that with any column name. So you can say find by name. And then we could pass in, right? So these are kind of just nice convenience methods. So you can use find by, but if you pass in some value that doesn't exist, right, it'll just return nil. It won't actually throw an exception, which is nice. The difference then between find by and where is where will always turn you a collection, so an array of objects. So if we said where, you know, is 1, we could then also say, you know, try the first one. And what's nice about try is if you call try on something that's nil, it won't blow up, right? So if we say .first on this will be fine because the first book exists, right? We were saying the book where ID is 1, give that to me and give me the first item in that array, and it does, right? But what if the array is empty and there is no item, right? In this case, we expect the array to be empty. We call .first on it, right, and it returns nil because there's nothing there. So it's usually easier if you're looking for a single item to just say find by and then, you know, pass in the ID. It just have to save you having to actually, you know, get an item. It's easy to make a mistake where you expect this to return a single item and then you know, call, example, you know, something like that on it. But that'll blow up because, right, it's not a single item, but it's an array. So if we call that, right, right, that doesn't make sense because it's calling .name on the collection and not on the individual item. But
So why is it return book?
Because that is the class name, right? It's an active record collection, right? So book.where, if we do it, it returns in this case, it returns just one. It returns a collection, right? An array, right? Because then we can say dot length, and it's one, right? And so it's easy to have this in the code. You forget about it, and then it returns you the class name. When really what you want is the actual book's name. Does that all make sense? Any questions? Sweet. Okay. So then let's get into the new stuff for today. Great. So we are going to go ahead and talk about user authentication. So let's go ahead and create a Rails new app, right? We're going to call this simple chat. We want to say let's create a Postgres database. Fantastic. All right, this is all standard by now. Everyone can recite these in their sleep, right? Rails new name /d Postgres. Fantastic. We're going to create our databases. What did I do? Oh, I didn't go into it. Simple chat. Great. So you may have guessed in the name that we're going to create a basic kind of messaging app, kind of like Snapchat. Who here does not know what Snapchat is? Okay, so it's right. It's a message service. You send a message. It can be read once, and then it disappears. When we try to create something similar, as you can tell, we're gearing you towards high-valued startups. Last week was Instagram. This week is Snapchat. But right, the goal is to send messages to people, and then you can view them. Once you view them, they disappear. Great. So we have our database. We got to run bundle. I believe it already ran for us, but let's be sure. We have, good Git practice, commit often. So we're just going to add everything. Great. Git commit initial commit. Cool. And I always like to kind of just make sure I can actually access the app. It's up and running. So we'll run a Rails server and check it out. Any luck? Great. Congrats, we're on Rails. All right, all standard stuff. Cool. You guys see that? All right. Great. So we have our standard Rails app, and so we're going to talk about user authentication, right? So last week we made an app, and anyone can see it, right? A lot of the data we created ourselves for the menu, and then when a user wanted to order something, they had to then fill out their name and their address and press submit. But we really, didn't capture that. We kind of just had that on the order. But now let's start to think about what it means to have an app where you log in, right? If you log in, you need users. They need to set passwords. You have accounts. Then they can go ahead and log in, access information that is specific to them. They can log out. All that sort of stuff. In the pre-work, we use Devise to handle this, and Devise is a pretty popular gem. But this week, we're going to just do it from scratch and really kind of just understand how authentication works, what it looks like. And Rails gives you a lot of tools to already do that on your own. And we're going to kind of use some of those this week to create authentication. So let's go ahead and create just a basic controller. Standard. We're going to want, so just a login page. So basically say, when you come to the home page, we're going to give you some buttons, maybe to create an account and to log in if you already have an account. Let's go ahead and start to create these controllers. Any luck, this command won't crash. Cool. So let's go open it up. Oops. Cool. So we have our hardware controller. We define just an index, which is great. So open up our routes, and we have get home index. Right. Last time we talked about not having the home, maybe saying just get index, and we'll map that to our action. So we'll say that is home index. Great, right? We need a root path, so we're going to say root is also home index. Right? Oh, you're familiar with this stuff by now. So we have our index. Let's go ahead and create a sign-in page. So let's see what we have in our views. And here we have home, great. We have index, fantastic. So, oops. All right, just our standard index page. We want to say just welcome. And we maybe give some options, right? So we're going to say, let's create a link to, and we're going to want to say, let's sign up, create a new user account. So we have a name for it, and we're going to say, let's create a new user, right? And we need a path for that. We haven't defined that path yet, but we'll go ahead and define it here. So we say, link us to the new user path. Great. So now we want to generate that path, and if we wanted to, we could go and we could say in here, remember, Rails generate resource users. Last time we used scaffold, and that does a lot of stuff for us. That creates a model. It creates a lot of default actions via the controller. It creates a lot of views for us. We don't really need all those. We don't really want to, we want to maybe customize things. We don't need all the things that it provides. So we can even define some of that ourselves. Those are helper methods, and we can use them, but we don't have to. So let's go ahead and define just in here resources users, right? We talked about what that means, right? Resources users gives you access to some standard routes. So Rails resources routes. Let's pull up the documentation. And there's a list of 7 resources. Here are the routes we get, right? So we basically get an index, new, create, show, edit, update, and destroy. And these are the standard 7 routes. Maybe we don't even need all of them, right? Maybe we only want a few of them, in which case we could even say, only give me certain routes, right? I only want actually the new and the create routes, right? And that'll only give me this route for the new and this route for create. But if we want all 7, we can go ahead and just say resources users. We also could say get example users and map that if we wanted to, right, to like a users controller / index. So there's many ways again to doing things, but since we'll go ahead for now and say resources users, and we'll see how many routes we end up needing. We can always modify that. So now that we have resources users, right, it gives us our new user path, but we haven't really defined where that action is or any view to handle that action, right? So if we were to run the code now, we don't really have a user controller, right? There's no users controller, and so let's just we sign up, right? Uninitialized constant users controller, just like we expected. Sometimes it's kind of cool if you expect an error and you see it, it means you're on the right path. It means you know what's going on. But again, we have our 7 routes defined here by that resources users kind of handiness. Great. So now that we kind of have our link to, let's go ahead and start to create the users model and the controller to handle it. So we're going to go ahead and create a model, and we're going to need a user, right? And in the resources, this is just the Rails magic, right? We defined users as a plural. This throws everyone off. It even threw me off this morning, but users is plural. In the controller, it's also plural, so it would be users controller. But the model is always singular. So we don't want to say generate users. We want to say just generate user. And what do we want on the user? Well, we kind of want a name, and we need an email. And what else does a user need? Password, exactly. So we could say password, but we actually never want to store actual passwords in the database. Can someone tell me why? Security, exactly, right? If someone hacks your database and they have access to passwords, that's bad news. So you never want to actually store the password. So we're going to do some fancy magic. We're going to actually create a password digest. And we'll see how that's used in a second. Great, so we have our model. I always like to just check out that migration file, just make sure it looks like we need to. Right, last time we said if we wanted to, we could even say null false, which is on the database, enforce a non-null constraint. We could, if we wanted to, say give it a default. We could even, if we wanted to, define an index. So we could add an index on the users table, on the name field. Let's say the email field. And we want it to be unique, right? That'll create a unique index for us. So essentially, if you try to insert a new user with an email that's been taken, it'll throw an error. And what's nice about this is that an index also gives you performance speed on querying it. But then there's a trade-off: is it every time you write to the database, it's a slower operation because now you also have to write the index. But these are all possible with the migration file. We don't anticipate having that many users, so we won't add it. You always can add indexes later in its own migration, no big deal. So we'll just keep the migration file as is for now. Great, and we're gonna have migrate. Cool. Great. So we have our users model. Right? It's very empty. And we just want to say, so let's add some validation. So let's say it validates the email, right? We kind of want this to be there. So we're going to say presence true. And that's basically saying if before you save the model, let's verify that the email field has some value. There's a lot you can do with validations. You can define your own function and have Rails call that function, and you can do what you want there. But this is kind of a nice, handy, just one-liner. It's asking just, is there a value in the email? If it's a number field, you can say numericality true, right? That would just say, make sure that it has basically an integer or a value. In this case, we actually want email to be unique. We don't want you to create multiple accounts with the same email. So we're going to say uniqueness true. And we could do that also as an index, but we'll do it as a Rails validation, just sticking with the Rails format. That's great, right? So we have our validation. We also need a password. And in the database, we have here a password digest field, right? So we're going to add some Rails magic, and we'll say has secure password, right? And what does that really mean? Well, let's check it out. Now let's go to the API docs, always a handy resource. And we're going to say, all right, what does has secure password really mean for us? Oops. You guys see that? So basically, it uses a gem called bcrypt to secure the password. Bcrypt is a password encryptor. It'll check some validations for us. It'll check that it's present, and it also allows us to use a password confirmation just to verify that the password is correct, and ask us to go ahead and use bcrypt from the gem file. So let's go ahead and do that. And what's nice about Rails is it actually already included it for us just in a commented out version. So if we uncomment it out, right, now we have access to has secure password. So I'll go ahead and do that, and I will run bundle. I can also run bundle install. Remember, it's the same command. It's really up to you. Great. So we make sure we have it. Going back to the documentation here, right? So a simple one-liner in the model gives us access to it. And earlier we added in the password digest field, and that's actually required for has secure password. You'll see here that it says this mechanism requires you to have a password digest attribute. And that's because we mentioned we don't want to save the actual password in the database, right? That's a security concern. So instead what we do is we encrypt the password using bcrypt, and it kind of looks like a bunch of hexadecimal code. And we'll actually check out the source here. And anytime you want to validate a user, you don't get the actual password. Instead, you also encrypt their password and compare it to the encrypted version you have in the database. So here is the source code for has secure password. We'll notice here it kind of does a bunch of validation. There's also a length. It checks to see if it's within a certain length. And it has an authenticate method. Great. And so here's the digest. So what it actually will store in the database will look something like this. It's a password digest. And what does this really mean? There's different parts to it. So you really want to make passwords really slow to access in case someone hacks the database, because then it makes it much harder for them to actually go through and find all the users. So this right here, the 10, is like a cost function, and you can set this default 10. You can change it if you want, but essentially it adds in more steps to the encryption. And so if you want to make it even slower, you can, and that's just another security thing if you want. I believe this value right here is what's called a salt. It's like a random kind of a hex, random value that's used to add on to the password, so the password becomes much longer. So rather than encrypt just their password, you encrypt their password plus the salt, and then that produces this, which is our password digest. The reason for the salt is that every row in the database table has a different salt, so they couldn't just create what's called like a lookup table. Right? If the salt was common amongst all the passwords, they could create a lookup table, which is a mapping of the most commonly used passwords via the salt to the password digest. And then they could look it up in a very fast manner. So because of that, each password has its own salt, and that's what this is. And then this last part is the password digest. It also gives us two functions, and these are both setter functions, which you notice here. It's saying if you want to set the password, this function gets called. And it basically, if you want to clear out the password, you can pass in nil, and it'll set the digest to nil and clear it out. Otherwise, it'll go ahead and actually encrypt the password, and that's what this is right here, right? It's saying, all right, give it the unencrypted password, go ahead and encrypt it, and save it as the password digest, which is the column in the database table. Same thing with password confirmation. It's an optional field. If you include it, it just verifies that the password matches the password confirmation. And with Science, it also includes an attribute reader. So this is the getter. So if we were to query just the password, it would basically, right, this exposes the password to someone who's querying it. Great. So this is kind of how the hash secure password works. The last thing is, right, if we want to log in, we'll call authenticate. And we pass in what the user entered, and that we compare that against the password digest, right? So it says if these two values are the same, then go ahead and say we're logged in. And so it kind of gives us the necessary framework for storing passwords securely in our database. Does that all make sense? Are there any questions?
How can you know the password after entry or next to
After what?
you enter password, you have a example, but I want to know what is the password.
You cannot. So
You want to know.
you can never know. So the secure ways to not know the password, right? So if you notice on secure websites, they'll never say, forgot your password, here's your password. They always say you can reset it, right? And that's because this is a one-way encryption. It's not a two-way encryption, right? So once you generate the digest, the password digest in the database, we never actually know what the password is. All we can do is we can compare values to it and tell you whether or not they match. So if you enter in the password, we can say with certainty that is the correct password, you can log in. Or we can say with certainty that is not the correct password, please try again. But we can never get the password back. Doing so would require two-way encryption, which is much less secure. A good question. Cool. All right, so let's go back. We added it to our gem file. Great. We say has secure password. And let's just see real quickly what that actually means. So open console. We're going to create a user, right? So user.new. If we wanted to save it, right, we couldn't because we were missing some validations. So we'll create an email. Howdy at coderschool.en. Great. We'll create a name. So now we have a name and an email. Is it still valid? No, right? Because we said hash secure password that ensures that there's a password. If we were to set a password, right, we'll just say for now, something like that, ASDF, right? We set a password. Cool. Now, if we put out the user model, you'll notice that we set the password, but the password digest field is filled out, right? And we actually can print it out directly. And that was that helper method that we saw, right? So it said password equals. It go ahead and first, and it created the digest to save in the database. Now, because we still have access to the user instance, right? This right here is the user instance. We actually can still get the password back. And that's because we haven't saved it yet, right? But if we want to go ahead and save it, right? And then let's go ahead and get it again. So now we say user.find, and this is the first one, right? We have now our user object. The password digest is there. But if we were to print out the password, what do you expect will happen? Nil, right? We've saved it, we fetched it. Now we can never know the password. It's only up here because we still had access to the that same instance of user that had that set the password, right? And that was that attribute reader that we saw, right? It said attribute reader password. It gives us access to reading it while we have the initial user. After that, we don't know the password and it's gone. Now, if we wanted to, we could just reset it because we have added in nothing here that prevents us from changing the password. So if we wanted to, set it again, we could set it to something new because we have access to it, right? But you really wouldn't want to do that if you have a user application. So now the user password is nil, but the password digest is still there. And so if we want to authenticate, we would, try to log in, and we say, let's just pass in some garbage. It says false. It's not the password, right? But now if we pass in our password, what do we expect will happen? Right? It'll true. In this case, it actually goes and returns to us itself. And so that's how we use it to authenticate. Okay. Great. So that kind of, we're going to want to do that logic and kind of add in hash secure password. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and delete that user so that we actually can, let's see. Oops. Cool. All right. So the authenticate method, right? Can someone summarize for me what it does? Exactly. It encrypts the string you put using the same salt as the digest, and then it compares whether or not it tells you it's good. Fantastic. Cool. So now that we have our model set up, let's go ahead and the same digest. Exactly the same. You have to say it again. The SHAs. You're talking about devise? Sorry, I'm not understanding the question. The same salt, exactly. So no. So bcrypt is the gem we're using, and it handles the salt for us. We don't have to create it, right? If we right, kind of here, this is the authenticate method, right? it'll use the salt from this digest to encrypt this password. Right? And so it'll go ahead and fetch it and pull out the salt and then use that to encrypt it using the same exact parameters and compare the two. Can you change the salt string on a password? I mean, are you asking like in the database table? Can you rewrite it to make it more secure? The salt is auto-generated by bcrypt. You can't really change how it generates salts. If you want to make it more secure, you could do other things though. So this parameter here is like a cost function, which essentially is how many steps it takes to generate the salt or to go from the salt to the digest. It's the number of steps in the encryption. And if you wanted to make it more secure, you could make this 20, and it'll mean that the cost to encrypt something, the runtime, is now twice as long. But then that means that if someone were to get access to your database, it would take them twice as long for each password, right? Twice as long per password to potentially hack is a lot more, right? It adds up over time. Can you say it again?
Let's say I do one code password.
You one call with a password.
I want code.
Called.
Yeah, code. So can I add secure code in the model?
No. So hash secure password is very specific, right? You have to say hash secure password, and as we said earlier, it looks for the password digest. The name is very right. Hash secure password. You can say hash secure something else. It has to be hash secure password. I believe there's a hash secure token, but that's more for authentication if you want to. But that's a very different workflow than hash secure password. Great. So now let's go ahead and start creating some actions. So we're going to generate our controller, users. Great. Let's open it up. So we're going to want to really, in this case, create a new user, right? We will say a user wants to log in and sign up with us, so we're going to need a new action. And eventually we'll also need a create, right? But for now, we need a form that the user can fill out to fill in the information. So we're just going to say user.new, right? Because we want to create a form. So now let's go ahead and fill out what that looks like. And we have here, let's see, app views users. It's empty, so we're going to create new, right, a form to fill out, and that's going to be HTML. Great. Cool. And we're going to say sign up. Right, and we're going to want to, standard Rails way, so we're going to say form for, and we're going to say at user, oops. Right, and we're going to want to create a form. Solid. And so we're going to want some fields. And so what we really want is a label for the name. Right, and this is going to be a text field. And for now, we'll just keep it very basic. Right, and we're going to want some other fields. What else do we want? We want an email field, right? So the user can enter in an email. And password. And here, actually, we don't want to show the password, right? So we're going to say password field, password. Cool. Very, no styling yet, kind of just basic form. So I ran bundle, so I'm gonna have to restart my server. And it's still starting up. Great, it's up. Let's go ahead. Great, so very basic. Sign up, and we have sign up, right? Name, email, and password, and we forgot a submit. So let's go ahead and do that. Cool. And we want to give it a name, so we're going to say create. Just sign up. Cool. Very basic, no formatting. We're about at 8 o'clock, so let's take a 5-minute break. I'll go ahead and add in Bootstrap so it starts looking a little nicer, and then we'll meet back here in 5 minutes.
Quick question. Can you repeat like one form for
Yeah, so Form 4 is a nice Rails thing. It's a Rails helper. Right, rather than creating your own form and then having to know how to pass it up, we can pass in at user, which is just a sparse user object, right? We said here just user.new, and it's not saved in the database. It's just a user object, and all we do is specify certain fields, and right. So this will go ahead and take the input of this text field and store it as the name attribute on the user model. Right. Same thing with email. Same thing with password. It'll go ahead and do that, and then because it's through Rails, it also knows which route to send up. So it'll send up the submit to the user's create action. Book, right? So if it was like a nested, you could actually do so Form 4, right? It's you could right. That's the same thing. In Rails, you don't have to right. You could also then pass in a nested resource here. So if it were a user in a book, you could pass in both, and it would then know to relate the book to the author. It would still send, in this case, it would send the action to the book controller, right? Because book is the nested resource of its parent. Okay, so let's take a quick break.